In this video, we're going to look at using the cosine rule. So just like the sine rule, the cosine rule helps us find an unknown side or angle inside a non-right triangle. We have to have a few bits of information for us to be able to actually use the cosine rule. So here's our first example. We've got triangle ABC. We know side C. We know side A. We want to find side B. What's really important is we need to know the angle that's opposite side B. So that pair, we need to know its angle to find the length of that side B. And this is a really important combination. When we're trying to use the cosine rule to find an unknown side, we must know the other two sides and the angle included between them. And that's obviously opposite the side we don't know. So we need to have this SAS combination to use the cosine rule for an unknown side. So let's take a look at it. It says A squared, a side squared, should be equal to the other two sides squared and added. Subtract 2 times B times C, the two sides, times the cosine of the angle. So we can see here, if I want to find side A, I must know angle A. So for our situation, we want to find side B. So we're going to say B squared equals the other two sides squared and added. So that's 5 squared plus 10 squared. Subtract 2 times 5 times 10 times the cosine of angle, for us is angle B, 36 degrees. Now, we can use our calculator to pop this in. We're not going to write down what this value is, or we're not going to square root it. We can use our numsolve on our class pad, and we can find out that this is 6.64 centimetres to 2 decimal places. You might like to pause the video at this point, pop this in your class pad opening in numsolve, and see if we get to the same point. So a very handy rule to use, knowing if we know two sides and the included angle. So what happens if we want to find an unknown angle? Well, essentially, if we want to know an angle, we're going to find angle theta. We must know the side that's opposite. We must know the other part of its pair. So the other thing we must know is the other two sides. So the combination to find an unknown angle using the cosine rule is side, 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 or SSS. So if we know all three sides, use the cosine rule. So what I've done is just rearranged the cosine rule and made it so it is in terms of saying the cosine of the angle that we want to find is equal to. Now, we can also remember this rule in this format, but because we have a class pad, numsolve works extremely well if we just put in the original cosine rule starting at A squared. But if we had it in this format, let's, for example, call this vertex A, because that's the one we don't know, B and C. So we'd have little side B, little side C, and little side A. It's really important to know these, because we're going to say B squared plus C squared, subtract A squared. So we're subtracting the square of the side that is opposite the angle. So let's fill it in for our example. We want to find angle theta, so the cosine of theta is equal to 4.5 squared plus 4.2 squared, subtract the side opposite, which is 3.4 squared. This is all divided by 2 times the other two sides, which were 4.5 and 4.2. Now, I'm not going to write down that value, but I know that I'm going to do the inverse cosine of this whole answer in my calculator if I'm using a scientific calculator, and then I'll do the inverse cosine. Otherwise, using numsolve in our class pad very easily will tell us that angle theta should be 45.85 degrees to 2 decimal places. One really nice thing to note is if you are using a scientific calculator and you've actually worked out the value before you do the inverse cosine, if this value is a negative, it will tell you that the angle is actually going to be obtuse. So it means that you might have a triangle that looks something like this, where you're finding this angle So it's actually going to tell you that you're going to end up with an obtuse angle. So it's an obtuse angled triangle. If you would like to know the proof of the cosine rule, we've got two options to have a look at. If we have a look at exercise 4H, question 13 has a lovely question that can guide you through proving the cosine rule because it involves a few things that we already know. Otherwise, there's connected to our online Connect lessons for the week is a Khan Academy video which beautifully explains the proof. Otherwise, we can work through it together in one of our following lessons. So now, before our next lesson on the cosine rule, from your textbook, have a go at exercise 4H questions 3 part A and D and 4 part A and D. Bring these along and we can debrief the cosine rule with these examples.